Welcome to the Disney Parks Podcast, your Disney infotainment podcast. Keep your hands, arms, feet, and legs inside the podcast at all times and get ready for the Disney Parks Podcast.
All right. Hey, welcome to this week's show. We have a great show for you. We have a book called Dream Chasing, captivating memoir by Bob Weis. It chronicles his 4-decade career of leading and completing so many projects at Walt Disney Imagineering and the Walt Disney Company. Bob, welcome to the show. I have so many questions, but let's start with the big dinosaur in the room. How did your journey with Disney begin?
Well, Tony, first of all, thank you so much for having me on your show, and you have a great group of folks who are loyal to you and who depend on you for great information about the park. So I feel really gratified to be here. So thank you.
Thank you.
I was still president of Imagineering. It was still during COVID. I was on Zoom calls 14, 15 hours a day, and I needed a creative outlet. And I actually wrote 2 books starting in that era. I started Dream Chasing. I wrote a book called Ghost Dog, a fiction book. And I just discovered writing again for some reason since college, probably. I discovered the power of writing as a personal experience, as a personal outlet. And at some point I was talking with the publisher at Disney Editions, and she said, you ought to do a book. You ought to do a book for kind of your journey. And I said, I don't think I can do it. And she said, you really only have to do about 250 pages. And I said, oh my God, I can't even imagine doing 250 pages on one topic. I've done nothing in the last 40 years but emails. And she convinced me I could do it. There's no ghostwriter. But there is a wonderfully, Wendy Lefcon of Disney Editions, there's a wonderfully encouraging person, an editor, who encourages you, helps keep you going, helps keep you focused. And we ended up with 400 something. It's kind of ended up to be the natural length. But it was, I have to tell you, it was a wonderful, wonderful journey personally too. Now that I look back, it was a kind of a way for me to frame up those years. So I'm very lucky. I feel incredibly lucky to have Disney Editions out there with it, and to have great people supporting it, and people like you who actually have heard it. The audiobook just came out, so I pinch me all the time. I go around, I do book signings. I'm doing that, and I just feel so lucky.
Yeah, it is very cool. Yeah. What was your first job at the Disney Company?
Oh, I was at Cal Poly University in Pomona, going to the School of Environmental Design as an architecture major, and I was spending most of my time in theater, not even worrying about my major that much. But I was doing both. And a lot of students at that college had summer jobs at Disneyland. And I grew up going to Disneyland because I grew up in Southern California. I thought, well, how cool would it be to have a job at Disneyland? That sounds fantastic. So I went down there. Excuse me. So I went down there and I applied, and I thought, oh, I'm an architect. I'm a theater person. I'm going to get a job on a show or driving the Pirates of the Caribbean or some incredible, role. And they said, okay, you got a job. And I said, what is it? It's like, you're going to sell ice cream and popcorn. I'm like, what? That's it? And, but I went out there and I checked out my costume, and I, learned how to multiply 35 times 3 times 4 times 5 times 6. Cause that's how much it was at that time. And we didn't have registers or anything like that.
Yeah.
But I just loved it, and it was an incredible influence on my life, Tony, because to be in the park all day, to be there, and when you're an outdoor vendor, you move. So one day you're in Fantasyland, one day you're in Tomorrowland, one day you're in an active street, sometimes you're in a more passive street. I learned so much, especially, I guess, studying architecture at the same time and urban planning.
Mm.
about how people move, how they use space,
Right.
how space is designed and developed. In retrospect, I could not have asked for a better role. So that was my first role.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Uh, let's get into the Imagineering part because I think this is where people get fascinated. For me, it is. But my question is like, how do you guys get from a blank piece of paper, blue sky, to an attraction or themed land? And I'm sure the process is different for both types or even each attraction. But just summarize kind of like how do you get from nothing to oh, there's the Tower of Terror. Look at that.
Yeah, well, that's what and you put your finger on it, Tony. That's what I wanted to do with the book.
Yeah.
Is I didn't want to write a long autobiography. I don't think anybody would be interested in my life story. But what I did want to do was take projects like Twilight Zone, Tower of Terror, and profile them, but make them accessible to people who, I feel like all of the people who are listening to this podcast, or people that know you, or read about Imagineering, have dreams, right? We all wake up with
Hmm.
interesting ideas, or we are walking down the street, we have an interesting idea, and the challenge is how to follow those ideas. And I got kind of enamored with the idea that it's not about following dreams, it's about
Right.
chasing them, because dreams are elusive,
Hmm.
and so you really have to believe in them. And so the Imagineering process, and outside too, but I'll take the Imagineering process. The
Yeah.
first challenge is you got to come up with an idea, right?
Right.
And that's almost always a collaborative thing. It's not normally one person sitting in a room. It's usually a group of folks, different personalities, different backgrounds, kicking a bunch of ideas together, in what we refer to as a charrette, where you might be in a
Hmm.
room for 2 or 3 days or 2 or 3 hours, and somebody comes up with something, and then you add something, and I add something, and we all keep adding to it, and we do little sketches and idea cards and stuff like that, and you emerge, however much longer, with something, and it's often impossible to tell whose idea it was. It was
Right.
really the collaboration creative of the idea.
Yeah.
So you start there. And one of the most important things in that idea process is not to cut things off. It's very easy for somebody to be in the room and say, well, we tried that 2 years ago and it didn't
Yeah.
work. It's there.
Right.
You don't want, you want to get everybody to turn off their sort of naysayers reaction and
Hmm.
just play. It's really truly one of the most creative aspects of the process, because then when you have an idea and everybody's excited about it, and you can kind of, in the case of Imagineering, you have to sell it through a lot of layers of management, right? You have to say,
Right.
we have this idea, what about this? You got to sell it to senior management, you got to sell it to the park, get them on board. Then you have lots and lots of time to figure out how hard it's going to be, how you're
Hmm.
going to do it.
Hmm.
And in the case of something like, Twilight Zone, Tower of Terror, for instance, let's say you have this germ of an idea. And the germ of that idea was, we're going to do this old, kind of seedy Hollywood hotel.
Right.
And what's the scariest thing that could happen to you? And, well, what if you got into the elevator and it broke loose? And everybody agreed, well, that's a pretty scary thing, right? Nobody wants that to happen to
Right.
them, right?
Right.
And so you say that, okay, that's what the idea, and the idea is going to build on how do you get there? What's happening in this hotel, and how is it possible that this elevator breaks loose, and then what happens? And then you're like figuring out with all of your ride engineers and technology people and creative people, well, how do you do that?
Mm.
And in that case, I'm glad you brought that one up. In that case, we were like, it has to feel like it broke loose and fell, right? It
Right.
has to feel like it fell. And we tested, and the natural Imagineering approach would be to gravitate toward roller coaster type tracks, because they're known. You know how to do them,
Yeah.
right? You know how to
Right.
have. There's a lot of these rides where you have a free fall,
Hmm.
but then it free falls as much as possible, but then in order to slow it down, it rolls out horizontally, right? And you end
Yeah.
up on your back to slow down. and we were saying like, no, we can't end up on our back because that's not an elevator.
Right.
Elevator, we wanted to just like fall like hell, and then all of a sudden it magically stops at the bottom, right? And that was not easy to come up with.
Yeah.
And so we went to a very tall test tower
Hmm.
in Connecticut, and these are the journeys you end up going on. There's an
Right.
elevator test tower, and they put us in it. They said, okay, we're going to ramp this thing as fast as it will go, and you
Hmm.
guys are going to be, it's going to scare the heck out of you guys. And
Right.
we rode it, and the elevator guy, the elevator engineer, screamed, and none of us did. None of the Imagineering guys did. And we got to the bottom, the door opened, they all standing there, really anticipating our reaction. And we said, it's too slow. It did. So
Didn't
we
scare us enough.
actually, it didn't exactly. And that's important because that feeling you get it on a roller coaster, or you get it sometimes when you're
Hmm.
driving your car on a hilly road or something, is when your stomach falls out, right? When
Right.
it really drops, right? And so we had to get that feeling. And actually, we discovered that required us to go faster than gravity. So like if you jump off the building, the ride system is pulling you down faster than that,
Right.
because that's what it took to really make you feel like we really fell somewhere.
Yeah.
And so we said, okay, we need to fall that fast,
Right.
and we need to feel that for at least a couple seconds, and then you got to stop us perfectly at the bottom.
Right.
And so you have a long journey to get all those things to work, plus
Yeah.
the story, plus the visual illusions, all that stuff. But in the end, if you're lucky, and that one was a lucky one, you get something that's long lasting. People love to do it. Some people hate it the first time, they're
Right.
never going to ride it again.
Yeah.
Some
Right.
people will never ride it.
Right.
But there is a core audience that loves to have a great experience like that. That's a very simple one, relatively simple, great story, simple.
Yeah.
So that's the journey you go through. And that was, maybe 5 years of my life, but you're doing that
Right.
in parallel to other things, right? It's
Sure.
coming and going and changing, and you're doing other things. But it's an incredibly rewarding process. But every one of them is kind of like an intriguing adventure to try to make it happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I worked security back in the 90s, and
Oh
Tower
yeah,
Terror. Yeah, Tower Terror was open, and I went. My shift was 3 to 11, so I would go in the morning and play in the park. So I went to Tower of Terror, and when I got to the bottom, the guy was like, "Are you a cast member?" He's like, "Yeah." He said, "I'd stay on," and I wrote it 13 times in a row. And I'm like, my legs were like, "All right, that's enough." It's probably a
I'm
good
glad
place to stop.
I'm glad your brain is working. I hope it still is. But
Exactly. Exactly.
but back then, when you're programming, we would sit in that ride,
Yeah.
and I'd have a little clipboard with me,
Mhm.
and okay, write it again. Okay, write it again. Okay, and after a while, I was like, oh yeah, let me write a note. We got so used to that thing happening over and over again. I
Yeah.
probably wrote it 100 times or more.
Wow.
During that period, probably more than that. And you do that, but now if you take me there, it scares the crap out of me. It's as many times as I've done it, experienced it. Now it's a whole fresh thing, so it's fun.
Right. So I'm going to just use Tower as an example for this, but when you guys come up with the story, like I'm sure there was a story first, like, all right, let's base this like on Twilight Zone, and you'll be in this hotel, and there's a story. Do you then try to find the technology that will help you tell the story, or do you go and find some technology and say, hey, we can apply this to these stories? How does that?
It depends. It depends, Tony. I think in the case of Twilight Zone, Tower of Terror,
Mhm.
it started as an old 1930s hotel.
Right.
And what could we do that would be scary? We didn't have anything at the studio that was intentionally kind of icky and scary. So we said, well, there's a whole kind of scary side to Hollywood. Let's do that.
Mm.
And then it evolved from different ride systems and different
Yeah.
storylines. But the core of it was still, we're trying to do a kind of an old Hollywood feeling, spooky, our version, the studio's version of the Haunted Mansion kind of thing.
Right.
So the idea started, and then lots of different technologies were explored. And then actually the idea of connecting it from an IP point of view to the Twilight Zone came pretty late in the process. We worked on
Right.
different kinds of IP for it. Um, so that's the journey of that one. But like if I
Yeah.
were to go back to, let's say, Star Tours, which was the first big collaboration with Lucasfilm,
Right.
that platform, which was a Rediffusion flight simulation platform,
Yep.
multi-access platform that allowed us to really, in sync with a visual image, take people on a ride journey. That actually started with the platform, with R&D
Okay.
on the platform, and then once that platform got interesting, there was an exploration of, well, what can you do with it? And it didn't really connect the right way until it was, well, what about Star Wars? And then it was like, that's the perfect thing, right?
Right.
So it can happen either way. Sometimes it starts as an R&D thing. Sometimes it starts as a story thing. I remember when we started Shanghai, and we really, really wanted to do Pirates, but we wanted to do a new version of Pirates. We wanted to do something that was really born from the movies, not from the Disneyland ride, because the Chinese audience didn't know the Disneyland ride. So what they knew were these movies that had been distributed there, right? So we wanted to do something epic. And one of the things about the classic water ride is you're in a boat and water pushes you through, right? And so there's no timing. There's no control of the timing. Water is just pushing you through. So the figures expressively, let's say it's a small world, have to be performing all the time, because you're just going to see them at any moment. You're going to see them, right? Same thing with the original Pirates of the Caribbean. What we wanted was, we want those pirates to talk to you when you get there, right? We wanted that kind of reaction. And so to do that, we wanted to know exactly where the boat was at a specific time. And we needed the boat. We wanted, ideally, for the boat to be able to point, so that Jack Sparrow could be right there, and you're pointed right at it, and he does performance, right? It's a very different kind of a system.
Yep.
But then we said, oh yeah, by the way, we still want it to be in the water.
Right.
So that was a big R&D process to figure out, how do you make a floating boat that's connected to nothing,
right?
And that we can completely program directionally and speed and all that stuff through the water. So they're all different. They all, it's usually, though, pretty quickly you have an idea about a story, you have a kind of a technology you'd like to try to use, and now you're trying to make them love each other, work together in a seamless way, and that's what you hope for all the time.
Yeah, I saw a preview of that at a D23 event, and I was like, wow, that makes Disneyland look like it's a small world in comparison. It's very technology forward.
I still, I love Disneyland. I always will love Disneyland.
Sure.
But you don't get the opportunity to do some of these things again that often.
Yeah.
Well, to do a whole Magic Kingdom again in Shanghai. So when you get an opportunity to rethink something, the challenge is make sure you do it better, because if you just kind of mess around with it, you're talking about great people who did a great thing. You don't want to do it less than they did. You don't want to end up not as good, right?
Right.
But if you can really truly invent something and still have a lot of the classics in it, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. In your book, you write about, a lot of challenges and things like that. But, how, like Shanghai might be an example. It's in a foreign country. There's different politics. There's different policy procedures. So how do you overcome those challenges, being the president of, Imagineering, and somebody says, we have to do it this way, or we need to do it this way in this country, or, we want a ride that, or even for Tokyo, we want a ride that's completely different from what you guys have in the States, because that's a, Oriental Land Company. So how do you overcome those challenges, Bob? Like, what was your process for doing that?
Or Shanghai. It's all exciting if you approach it with the right frame of mind, which is to not come there as a kind of know-it-all Disney or know-it-all American, but come there with your heart open, your mind open, realizing that if you're gonna get it done successfully, you're gonna work in collaboration with people in that country, talented people in that
Right.
country, and you need to find where's your source of sculptors and artists and designers and writers, and really go out and find the people who you're going to collaborate with, and then trust that they know something about the market that you don't know, and you know a lot about Disney that they don't know, right? So it
Sure.
becomes a really great collaboration. I think in the case of China, which is the most recent one and the
Hmm.
last big foreign project I did, it was challenging because we had never worked there. We had most companies in the West had not worked there.
Right.
So you're going in somewhere, and we were really, in many ways, designing the most technologically sophisticated park we'd ever done in the least knowledgeable area we'd ever worked in.
Right.
And there were some basics. I wasn't president at the time of Shanghai. I was
Okay.
an executive, and Howard Brown was the head of production and project management. And he and I worked as a very strong partnership. But we realized basic things like worker safety were
Mm.
not there, and we just couldn't imagine a Disney project built, that did not respect or did not have the complete respect of the safety of the workers, which we do everywhere we go.
Right.
It's a high, number one priority. So then you're there, like, not only we're trying to design Tron, we're trying to design Pirates, we're designing a park, but we're also trying to
Hmm.
figure out, okay, how do we ensure every worker is trained, every worker has safety equipment,
Right.
they have a place to live, because they couldn't live in Shanghai, and they came in from farms all over China. Where they're going to live that's safe and
Hmm.
healthy, and where they have resources like libraries and movies, and you know
Right.
it you don't know what you're going to face in the specific instance. We're very lucky, let's say in Orlando, because we know the contractor environment. We've known it for decades. The
Right.
same
Yeah.
people show up, right, in the contractors. In Tokyo, we're very lucky because they've been building high quality Disney attractions since 1982. That's a long relationship
Hmm.
for four or five major contractors that we work with, and show contractors and sign contractors and all that. But when you go someplace completely new, you got a big job to do, and you don't know what
Right.
you're going to face. But it's what you have to do to get these things done. You can't
Yeah.
shortcut it. You can't.
Yeah.
There's no shortcutting a Disney project. They're big. They're complicated. Um,
Right.
the company has a high bar of safety and sustainability, and so
Yeah.
you just pick up where you are, and you have to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have a particular memory or fond memory of, you know, Paris, Tokyo, Shanghai, one of those parks, or maybe one from each of them? Something that really sticks out, like, oh, that was a really, great time. We had a great time, building it, constructing it, making it work. Um,
Well, one of the great things you get in this business is the opportunity to travel to all these places and to meet friends, often local friends who you work with side by side. It's almost like you went to battle with them, right? I mean, you
yeah.
really you really went through a lot together, and then you go out to eat together, you take trips together, they take you out to show you their country, that kind of thing. So
Mhm.
it's such a amazing journey, and you remember, a lot of the friends, literally a lot of the friends that I knew back in 1982 building Tokyo Disneyland, I'm still in contact with in Japan.
Yeah.
um, and I go back to I've gone back and gone to the same yakitori place that I went the first night I was there.
Sure.
So much has changed in Japan, but so much has stayed the same culturally too. But um, the friends you meet, the project team members, the tough times. I'd say, people ask me what your favorite project is. I usually say it's the ones that were the toughest, the ones where we
Hmm.
all worked together.
Yeah.
But a big common thing, I'd say, between all of those is there's a moment.
Hmm.
There's a moment that we all share, which is when you first let the public in. And I'm not talking about families or construction families or
Right.
but I'm talking about that first day. It's usually a preview,
The paying public.
and some group of paying preview public comes in, and there's a Imagineering tradition that you go down, you stand by the main entrance or by the entrance to the attraction if it's a new attraction, and you just watch them come in, and it's usually the whole team there. And there is not a dry eye in that group, man. That if you've spent 7 years getting ready for that moment, we're all crying, we're all emotional, we're all hugging. But these poor people coming in, it's like, what's wrong with these people, right? But you realize here's grandmothers and grandfathers and moms and kids, and they're all coming in, and they don't know what they're coming into. You've created it.
Yeah.
They've just waited in line a little while, and now they're coming in, and you've spent 7 years trying to orchestrate that moment. And it is truly a wonderful moment. It's also kind of a sad moment because you realize it's not yours anymore. It's theirs.
Right.
From then on, it's theirs, and that's a wonderful thing. But for you realize there's kind of a loss. Like, okay, from now on, we can't just walk around the park whenever we want. You can't just you're gonna, if you want to change the color on a wall, you're gonna have to do it at 2:30 in the morning.
Right.
On a Tuesday night or something like that.
Yep.
So it's kind of a real, it's like graduation night, right? It's a real thing, a handover that the universe has in many ways. But that you do, it doesn't matter if it's Paris, Tokyo, Hong Kong. When you experience that moment, it's a big moment.
Yeah. In the book too, you had the pleasure of working with two different CEOs. There was Michael Eisner and then Bob Iger. I mean, what's the challenges, when Michael left and Bob took over? How does, was there different thinking? Like Bob says, no, we're going to try it like this now, or, how do you transfer, that cardinal knowledge and, from one CEO to another? Because they both probably had different styles of doing it.
Yeah, well, when I started, actually, it was Card Walker, who had worked under Walt and was more of an operational CEO, and he was a big boss. We all did very formal presentations and boards and things like that for Card. Rarely saw him, and Dick Nunes, who from Legend of Walt Disney World, was the head of operation, and he was. We all tried to put our best foot forward with Dick too, and then there was a slow period. There was a slow period after I finished Tokyo. My colleagues finished Epcot. There was kind of a slow period where it was like, well, is the theme park business ever going to go on? Are we ever going to build another park? And suddenly Michael Eisner and Frank Wells come in. And it's like, we want to do stuff, and we want to do it now. We want to do, Paris Disneyland, and we want to do Disney MGM Studios. And so all of a sudden, you were kind of depressed going down, and all of a sudden it's like, wow, go as fast as you can.
Right.
And Michael Eisner, who I still know, I don't want to talk about him like his past tense, but
sure,
was one of these personalities. So was Frank, that saw possibilities in everything, and saw and loved pitches, loved creative. Michael came out of the television business, loved to talk about creative ideas. And so we had a huge agenda of stuff moving forward, more than we could possibly do. And those were great years. I actually left the company and came back, and now Iger had already been in charge for a while. And the first time I met Bob was when I started working on expansion of Disney California Adventure. And I Bob was, I'd say, and again, he's there now, but at that time, I would say Bob was less dramatic. Michael was kind of like throw it all on the wall, and
that's what I heard. The stories from Ron Logan.
Right. Yeah. And Bob less dramatic, but equally creative, equally enthusiastic about ideas. And as an example, when we started Shanghai, Shanghai would be the so far would be the first and only park that had Bob's name alone on it. The other parks
Right.
he had been started under Michael. So
Yeah.
so Bob was very encouraging us, um, on Shanghai, to push the limits of the traditional boundaries of what we might think Disneyland was. And he spent lots and lots of time with us. We spent tons of time together in Glendale during the concept phase. He would come over a lot. We go through all the lands, we go through all the attractions. He was a huge supporter, of how important the project was. And then as we were, struggling to get it done, he spent a lot of
Mm.
time flying back and forth. Excuse me, flying back and forth to visit us
Right.
in the field. And we took him around. He never flinched. I mean, we took Bob out into the mud and the heat and the smog and the rain and to
Right.
the workers communities and to their cafeterias to see where they were living. And
Hmm.
he saw it all. And the great thing about Bob I think, was because he saw it all.
Mm.
Uh, when you sat down and he would say, like, well, when are we going to open? And we'd say, we don't know. He understood.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, well, you guys aren't just working hard enough, right? He couldn't say
Yeah.
that because
Right.
he knew what we were doing. He knew
Yeah.
exactly what we were doing. So they were great experiences. I'll say I have another CEO out there,
Hmm.
which is Bob Chapek.
Yeah.
And when I was president, most of the time I was president was with Bob Chapek.
Right.
And, lots of ups and downs in the press about Bob Chapek and all that stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
But what I'll tell you about Bob Chapek is during those years that we worked together, um, Bob Bob developed a great appreciation for the creative side
Mm.
of Imagineering. He started out quite skeptical of us, like we were kind of big spending, you
Yeah.
know, money wasting kind of people. He ended up, I think, with a high degree of respect for Imagineering, and
Yeah.
we did with him too. And we developed an agenda of stuff, a huge agenda of stuff that we just finished. We did with the treasure is one of the last things we got approved with Chapek. So
Yeah.
every CEO from Walt, I think that to me the most important thing, Tony, about Imagineering is that the CEO should consider Imagineering to be their private place.
Mm.
That we are Imagineering is their way of thinking about the future of the company, and
Right.
I think that's really important. And when they do, I think they benefit. They benefit with their creative process, their creative long-term thinking, and the company benefits with projects.
Sure. Yeah. 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 You mentioned that in the book, and I found that kind of an interesting way to thinking about it. That is the creative playground where they can, say, "Hey, go try and
Well,
build
yeah, and
this." Yeah.
if you think about it, with the way Disney's structured, there's always a head of the film business, and so they
Right.
have their creative input, right? There's a
Hmm.
head of animation, there's a head of Pixar, there's
Yeah.
the place that the CEO really has the most creative leverage is the parks.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's in the parks where often everything comes together.
Yeah. Yeah. Two last questions. One is like, what advice would you give somebody, aspiring Imagineer, you know, what should they be doing to try to become that Imagineer?
Yeah, Tony, I was just at my old alma mater, Cal Poly Pomona School of Environmental Design. Shout out to them, a fantastic school, great theater school there. Um, and I advise the other school, which I have tremendous respect for, the Savannah College of Art and Design,
Hmm.
which has a big immersive and theme park design group. Um, I tell students, number one, I say there's perseverance because
Mm.
everybody wants to go. It's kind of like the film business. Everybody wants to go to work for a Pixar or Disney or ILM, right?
Right.
But there's a million places you can start your career. And the same thing in the park business. You can start at WDI, and I hope you do, and I hope you start there or Universal Development or someplace like that. But
Hmm.
there are lots and lots of companies who are in this business in the museum world, in the park world, that you can start. The most important thing is to have a great sense of where your talents lie and the ability to show your work. And it just hasn't really changed that much to me. You and I are of the generation where you put stuff in a book and you took it in, you showed the book, right? You showed your portfolio. It
Right.
doesn't matter that it's now a QR code that somebody looks at online. You're still telling a story about yourself.
Yep.
It's not about, especially today where there's AI and there's, lots of digital tools available to do a beautiful, beautiful painting, right? You can do the most amazing, what Herb Ryman and the original guys at Disney did all in watercolor and pencil.
Right.
You can edit 1,000,000 times.
Yep.
And so put yourself in the shoes of this HR professional who's going to see 50 portfolios in a day. How are you going to make yourself distinctive? And if you're lucky enough to land an interview, talk about yourself. A lot of people put only finished stuff in their portfolios, and I say, okay, put the finished product in there, but show me the stages. Tell me the story of what you did. How did you put this together? Where'd you come up with the idea? How'd you come up with the image? I think the most important thing that I would look for, at least, is what is that person's thought process? What drives them? What drives their passion for wanting to do this? And you have to, even if you're a introverted artist or engineer or whatever, you got to be able to talk about yourself. You got to make yourself distinctive. And I encourage everybody to keep a book or electronic book, doesn't matter, filled with their images. Think about how to talk about them. Work with others. It's a very collaborative business. Whenever you get a chance to do a group project, do a great job on a group project, because that's what your whole career is going to be like. It's always going to be big groups of people, right? And kind of know what you're after. Am I more of an engineering, technical type person, or am I more of a writer, or do I love to draw, or I love to build? All of those things are viable, and once you get there, you'll probably do a little bit of all of them. But have something you're really good at that you can sell. The number one thing is to get in the door, right? How do you get in the door? Right. And once you're in the door, you can do a lot.
Yep. So what do you think would be, your legacy to future Imagineers? That now that you're kind of retired from WDI, what did you say? Hey, I'm going to leave this for those future Imagineers to figure out or, build on. And that's a tough question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's because I just don't think of myself that way. But I do. I will say, from going around and signing books, that I thought you go like to Barnes and Noble and you sign books. Like people hand you a book and you sign it, right?
Right.
What I realized is when you go, and last week I was in Orlando for the IAPA convention.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And I signed books there. I signed books at Club 33. I signed books at Imagineering. I signed books at World of Disney. We got to the end of the book. We got to the end of the week, and we estimated I had signed 1,200 books in a week.
Wow.
And what I realized is that each book signing, and I should have known this because I kind of saw this in Marty Sklar, my mentor, is that each book signing is a moment, and someone is there because it's important to them.
Yes.
And it is an important moment to them. If they bought a book and they're coming to you for a signature, they want to tell you about something about their life, their kids' life, their family, that going to the parks. And what I realize, and I'm not saying this about myself, Tony, I'm saying what I realize is that people have a great sense of trust in Imagineering, in the stewardship of their dreams, the stewardship of the parks that they love so much, that we are going to do the right thing. And you cannot undervalue those of us who work in this world how important that audience trust is, right? And so they want to express it to you, and I try to be very patient, even if I look back and I see a long line behind them. It's like, this is this person's moment. You can't cut it short. Can't just sign the book, and I always try to ask people, what their connection is from Disney, and almost everybody has a really emotional story. I had a guy who came up and he had his son with him, and we just started bantering. It wasn't like dramatic. I was just,
Right.
how are you guys? They're laughing, and finally the father turns to me. He says, I have cancer, and I don't know if I'm going to survive it, but this is my son, and we go to the parks together, and we're going to enjoy this time. And
Wow.
And he reached in his pocket. He had the thing. It was kind of like a Saint Christopher, and he said, I think you're a good person,
Right.
and this protects me, but I'm going to give it to you. It protects you now. This is
Right.
all in a couple
book
minute
signing.
book
Yeah.
signing.
Yeah.
So I feel like
Yeah.
none of us, and it doesn't matter if what park company you're with or whatever, people who go places where their dreams come to life, and they go there, and they went there, their parents took them, now they're taking their grandkids, whatever. It's really important. This is a very emotional medium and emotionally valuable to people, and that's what I've learned. That's really what I've learned about this.
Yeah. It's fantastic. Like I said, the book is an excellent read or great listen. I chose the listen method. It was just easier while I was working. But
thank you for trying it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Worked pretty hard on the audiobook. Thanks for doing it.
It came out great. Don't worry about it.
I also have a new book out, Tony. I also have a new book out, Tony, called Ghost Dog. That's the pitch. A dog who is a ghost who follows you home, and it's based on the haunted dog. And it's a nonfiction, young adult book. It has 30 illustrations by a wonderful Disney animator named George Scribner, who draws dogs really well.
Right.
When we just put together our love for dogs and the haunted mansion and ghosts, but I'll tell you, the other thing I've discovered, Tony, in the last several months is how many wonderful independent bookstores there are out there still.
Yes.
In your town, whoever's listening. And yes, you can definitely get it on Amazon. I'll be happy if you do, but I'll also be happy if you run out and get your independent local bookstore to get it for you. So one way or the other. But I'd love to hear from people. I'd love to hear from people what they think of the audiobook or Ghost Dog or Dream Chasing. And hopefully, my deepest hope is that Dream Chasing inspires people to follow their own dreams, or chase them, rather.
Yeah. So books available on Audible. It's also available, like Bob said, on Amazon. And now you have to go check out Ghost Dog as well. So perfect, right? Is there a place people can find you on the internet if they want to email you or send you a message, or hey, I love the book, or
Yeah. If you go to Amazon and you go to Dream Chasing, you can find both Dream Chasing and Ghost Dog. And if you press on my name, it takes you to my author site.
Okay.
And they can send me an email from right there.
Perfect.
I'd love to hear from people. Love to hear from comments.
Yep. Once again, thank you for your time. Thank you for the great stories, and I loved, listening to you tell all these great stories of everything that's been built. But it's definitely a fantastic read if you're a Disney nut, and I have probably over 100 Disney books, so this is in my collection. Perfect.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Tony, thank you so much. It's been really wonderful to speak with you.
Yep. All right. Stay tuned.
The Disney Parks podcast is not affiliated with the Walt Disney Company. All Disney parks, attractions, lands, shows, event names, etc. are registered trademarks of the Walt Disney Company.